Imagine a city that has spent 5 centuries terrified of a single word: king. In the spring of 44 BC, Rome was no longer a simple city-state. It was a sprawling, chaotic superpower. And at its center stood a man who had become more than a mortal, but less than a god. On the morning of March 15th, Gaius Julius Caesar stepped out into the humid air of the Roman spring, ignoring the pleas of his wife, the warnings of his doctors, and the whispers of a conspiracy that had already reached a fever pitch. He walked toward the theater of Pompeii, unaware that he was walking into a trap set not by his enemies on the battlefield, but by the very men he called his friends. This was not just a murder. It was a surgical strike against the concept of absolute power, a desperate gamble to save a republic that was already dead on its feet. By the time the sun set that day, the floor of the Senate would be stained crimson, and the course of Western civilization would be altered forever. In this investigation, we are going deep into the shadows of the Ides of March to uncover the machinery of a coup that was years in the making. We will look past the Shakespearean drama to find the cold, hard political reality of a man who won every war but lost the peace. We will explore the propaganda, the secret meetings, and the devastating betrayal that turned a celebration of Roman liberty into a bloodbath. If you're fascinated by the moments where history turns on a single blade, you'll want to join us as we peel back the layers of Rome's most infamous day. To understand why Caesar had to die, you have to understand the world he built. Rome was a society obsessed with balance, a republic designed specifically to ensure that no one man could ever hold total control. For 500 years, the Senate and the people had shared power, but the system was cracking under the weight of its own success. Caesar didn't just break the system, he mastered it. He was a populist genius who knew that if you fed the poor and paid the soldiers, the elites in the Senate couldn't touch you. By the time he returned from his conquest of Gaul, he wasn't just a general, he was a titan. He had bypassed the traditional levers of power, using his private army and his immense wealth to bypass the laws of the state. But here is what most people miss about the months leading up to the assassination. Caesar wasn't just a tyrant to his enemies, he was a puzzle. He had been named Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life. In the Roman mind, a dictator was a temporary emergency measure, a man given absolute power for 6 months to fix a crisis. By making it permanent, Caesar had effectively declared the republic over. He began wearing the high red boots of the ancient kings of Alba Longa. He sat on a golden throne in the Senate. He even allowed his face to be put on coins, a move that, in the Roman world, was usually reserved for gods or the dead. The tension in the city was a physical thing, a static charge waiting for a conductor. The conspiracy wasn't a monolith. It was a fragile alliance of about 60 senators, each with their own motive. Some were genuine idealists who believed they were saving freedom. Others were simply jealous. Men who had been passed over for promotions or who felt eclipsed by Caesar's shadow. At the center were 2 men, Cassius, the pragmatic architect of the plot, and Brutus, the man whose very name carried the weight of Roman history. It was Brutus's ancestor who had driven out the last kings of Rome centuries earlier. The conspirators knew that for their act to be seen as a liberation rather than a common murder, they needed Brutus. They needed the moral authority his name provided. As the Ides of March approached, the air in Rome was thick with omens. Now, whether you believe in the supernatural or not, the historical record is obsessed with the idea that the universe itself was screaming a warning. There are reports of strange lights in the sky, birds of prey fighting in the forum, and Caesar's own horses refusing to eat and weeping in their stalls. His wife, Calpurnia, reportedly woke up screaming on the night of the 14th, dreaming that the house was collapsing and that Caesar was being murdered in her arms. She begged him not to go to the Senate, Caesar, who was notoriously secular and often mocked traditional religion, actually hesitated. He was feeling ill, possibly suffering from a return of his famous falling sickness, which modern doctors speculate might have been epilepsy or a series of mini-strokes. But this is where things get strange. One of the conspirators, Decimus Brutus, a man Caesar trusted so much that he was actually named as a secondary heir in Caesar's will, arrived at his house. Decimus didn't use threats, he used social pressure. He laughed at the idea of a great general staying home because of a woman's dream or a priest's bad omens. He told Caesar that the Senate was waiting to confer even more honors upon him. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Caesar, driven by his own massive ego and a refusal to look weak, dressed himself and walked out the door. The walk to the theater of Pompey was short, but it was lined with missed opportunities. A teacher named Artemidorus reportedly tried to hand Caesar a scroll containing the full details of the plot. Caesar took it, but because of the crowds pressing in on him, he never read it. He even saw the soothsayer Spurina, who had warned him to beware the Ides of March. Caesar mocked him, saying, "The Ides of March have come." Spurina's reply was chilling. "Aye, Caesar, but not gone." The Senate was meeting in a side room of Pompey's theater because the traditional Senate house was being rebuilt. This meant Caesar was entering a space owned by his former rival, a man he had defeated in a brutal civil war. As he took his seat, the conspirators gathered around him like vultures. They used a fake petition for the return of an exiled man as a way to get close. Tullius Cimber grabbed Caesar's robe, pulling it down from his neck, the signal for the attack. Caesar reportedly shouted, "Why? This is violence." It was the last thing he said as a man in control. The first blow came from Casca, who struck at Caesar's neck with a dagger, but his hand trembled, and the wound was superficial. Caesar, a seasoned soldier, fought back. He grabbed Casca's arm and pierced it with his stylus, the sharp metal pen used for writing on wax. But then the rest of them descended. It wasn't a clean execution. It was a frenzied, chaotic mess. In their panic, the conspirators were so frantic that they actually stabbed each other while trying to get to Caesar. There are accounts that suggest the scene was so horrific that the other senators who weren't in on the plot were paralyzed with fear, unable to move or even scream. The famous moment where Caesar sees Brutus and stops fighting is one of the most debated scenes in history. While Shakespeare gave us Et tu, Brute, contemporary sources suggest something different. Some say he said nothing, simply pulling his toga over his head to die with dignity. Others claim he spoke in Greek, saying kai su, teknon, which translates to, "And you, child?" This has led some historians to suggest a deeper, darker connection, that Brutus might have actually been Caesar's biological son from a long-running affair with Brutus's mother, Servilia. If true, the betrayal wasn't just political. It was the ultimate act of parricide. When the dust settled, Caesar lay at the base of a statue of Pompey, his old enemy. He had been stabbed 23 times, though only one wound, a thrust to the chest, was found to be fatal by the physician who later examined the body. The conspirators ran into the streets, waving their bloody daggers and shouting about liberty. They expected the people of Rome to break into song to celebrate the end of the tyrant, but they had fundamentally miscalculated. The city didn't cheer. It went silent. The shops closed, the streets emptied, and a heavy, terrifying hush fell over the capital. The machinery behind the throne didn't just stop because the man at the top was gone. Caesar had spent years building a loyal base among the veterans and the urban poor. While the senators were celebrating their liberation on the Capitoline Hill, Mark Antony, Caesar's right-hand man, was already moving. He secured Caesar's will and his private papers. He realized that the conspirators had no plan for what came after the murder. They had killed the man, but they hadn't killed the system he created. The funeral of Julius Caesar is perhaps the greatest example of political propaganda in the ancient world. Antony didn't need to incite a riot. He just needed to show the people what they had lost. He read Caesar's will aloud, revealing that the tyrant had left a significant sum of money to every single citizen of Rome and had turned his private gardens into a public park. Then, in a theatrical masterstroke, Antony lifted Caesar's blood-stained toga to show the crowd the holes made by the daggers. The silence of the city turned into a roar of rage. The people who the conspirators thought they were saving began tearing the city apart to find the murderers. This is the point where the narrative of saving the Republic completely collapses. Instead of a return to democracy, the assassination triggered 13 more years of civil war. The conspirators were forced to flee the city they thought they had liberated. But they weren't just running from Antony. A new player had entered the game: Octavian, Caesar's 18-year-old great-nephew and posthumously adopted son. Most people at the time dismissed him as a boy who owes everything to a name. But Octavian proved to be more ruthless and calculating than Caesar ever was. One of the most fascinating hypotheses about Caesar's death is whether he actually wanted it to happen. Some historians point to the fact that he had recently dismissed his Spanish bodyguard, despite knowing there were plots against him. He was a man obsessed with his legacy and his image. He was aging, his health was failing, and he knew that a slow decline into senility or a bedridden death would ruin the myth he had spent a lifetime building. By dying at the height of his power, in the heart of the Senate, at the hands of those he had pardoned, he became a martyr. He ensured that his name, Caesar, would become the title for every emperor for the next 2,000 years. The aftermath was a purge. Antony and Octavian formed an alliance and systematically hunted down every man who had a hand in the murder. Brutus and Cassius were eventually cornered at the Battle of Philippi in Greece. When they realized the cause was lost, they both took their own lives with the very daggers they had used on Caesar. The Republic didn't come back. It was replaced by the Roman Empire, a system even more autocratic and centralized than anything Caesar had envisioned. The conspirators had tried to kill a king to save a republic, but all they did was clear the way for an emperor. When we look back at the Ides of March, we see a cautionary tale about the nature of power and the blindness of idealism. The conspirators focused so much on the man that they ignored the conditions that made the man possible. They thought the problem was one individual, but the problem was a broken system that could no longer govern its own vast territories. They used violence to solve a political problem, and in doing so, they validated violence as the ultimate political tool. The death of Julius Caesar remains the most famous assassination in history because it represents the ultimate collision between the individual and the state. It's a story of how pride can blind a genius, how envy can masquerade as virtue, and how the pursuit of liberty can sometimes lead straight into the arms of a darker tyranny. If this investigation changed how you see the fall of the Republic and the bloody birth of an empire, join us for more deep dives into the shadows of power. In the end, Caesar's death didn't prove that no one man could rule Rome. It proved the exact opposite. By removing the one man who was trying to hold the Republic together, the conspirators proved that the Republic was already a ghost. As the smoke cleared from the civil wars and Octavian took the name Augustus, the first emperor, the people didn't fight for their lost votes or their ancient assemblies. They accepted the peace of a graveyard. It leaves us with a haunting question that still echoes in the halls of power today. Is it better to live under a stable tyrant or to die in the chaos of a collapsing freedom? The answer to that question is written in the blood on the Senate floor.